It's a rainy, gloomy day here in South Florida, but my little patio garden is loving it. We haven't had rain for a couple of weeks, but it's a nice cool temp for us. And I'm going to make some apple cider donuts that I didn't get done yesterday on my meal preps. Come with me and I'll show you how I do it. Step one is to boil 1.5 cups of apple cider until it reduces down to a half a cup. And while that does its thing, I'm going to get the dry ingredients into a bowl. And so I'm here in the kitchen again, Sunday morning. It's 8 o'clock. I have to get ready to go show houses about 9:30. So I'm trying to make the most of this little window of time and bang out some apple cider donuts to use up some apple cider that I realized we still had on hand from the fall. It says it's good till August, so I'm going to use this little bit and probably dump the rest because we're never going to drink it. And I will take you along as I make these. It's a rainy day, good day to be baking something. And I love this recipe because it's a baked donut. It's not fried. I don't care for fried food for a lot of reasons. And we've made this once before, which is why we bought the apple cider back in the fall. And it turned out great, just terrific. I even took some to my office. Everyone raved. So I highly recommend, and I'll put a link down below. I just wanted to show you guys as I'm pulling these ingredients out, older and wiser really is true in some ways. And I don't know why it took me years. I guess maybe YouTube has kicked us all up a notch on how we do things. But I started keeping the main ingredients for making baked goods. So baking soda, baking powder, yeast, vanilla, and I just tuck these bouillons in here because they just fit there better than anywhere else. And I also use those frequently. So you get the idea here. That way I just grab it out. I don't have to pull a whole bunch of these things out of the cabinet randomly. And it's wonderful. I think I got this at Aldi. So I've got that reducing down on the stove. It's almost there. Meanwhile, I'm going to get all these dry ingredients together. So 2 cups of flour that I've pre-measured, a teaspoon of baking soda. It's the first time I've used these adorable little seashell measuring spoons that I think my mom maybe gave me years ago. But for some reason, every single one of my teaspoon plastic measuring spoons has wandered off. Strange, but true. So a teaspoon of the baking soda, 3/4 a teaspoon of baking powder, and always check your dates, especially on things like baking powder. This is good until August of 23. A teaspoon of cinnamon, and then it calls for a teaspoon of apple pie spice, which those are hard to find to start with. And when I did see some last fall, one little tiny container was like $6 at Publix. So I said, that's crazy because this recipe gives a sub recipe for apple pie spice, and I will link that as well. And it's basically cinnamon, nutmeg, and cardamom, which I managed to snag this on clearance at Publix for $1, which is amazing, and being organic. And I snagged it. It's one of those you almost never use, but when you need it, you need it. And it smells really interesting, kind of like a spa. Anyway, so this apple pie spice recipe is a 4-to-1 ratio. I only need a teaspoon for this recipe, but call it half a teaspoon there. And the nutmeg, 1/4 a teaspoon. And the cardamom, 1/8 of a teaspoon. and then a half a cup of packed brown sugar, and half a cup of white sugar. And you guys, I'm trying not to go to the store until the middle of February. And this is all the brown sugar I have left, about 1 cup. So I won't be baking much between now and February 15th. All right, so I'm going to stir up these dry ingredients. And now it calls for, on the wet side, 2 tablespoons of melted butter, half a cup of milk, and I only have heavy whipping cream on hand, and I'm down to half a carton of that, darn it. So I used about 2 tablespoons of the cream, maybe 3, and then topped it up with water. And a teaspoon of vanilla. All right, so our cider has reduced down to about half a cup. And the recipe also calls for 1 egg. So I'm going to go ahead and add the egg, mix this up, and then add the cider at the end because it's hot and I don't want it to cook the egg. Now I'm down to 15 and counting. Or wait, make that 17. So good. And I am just a pumpkin spice, let's call it apple spice in this case, scent kind of girl. So one last hurrah here. All right, so I've got the oven preheating at 350. I don't have a pastry bag, so I'm going to do the classic thing of putting it in a Ziploc bag and cutting the corner off. All right, get all the air out of your bag. If you've never done this technique before, I just fold it over because that is the easiest way to make sure you get it all out. And then kind of twist the top a little bit before you cut a corner, like you would a pastry bag. And I like to pull up one of the bottom corners and hold that in my hand as well, because that just kind of helps keep things under control. We'll see how this goes. Oh, my daughter and I did this together in the fall. We had fun. Oh, I think I more successfully did it with her help. Oh my goodness. Should have cut that hole a little smaller, you guys. I was looking like a pro there for a second. And I could tell I got these trays too full. We're going to have some fluffy donuts. They're going to look like cupcakes, but that's okay. All right, so whole side up. And I'm going to take a little bit of batter out of these overfilled cups, and then I'm going to put it in the oven for 10 to 12 minutes. Okay, so while that first pan of donuts is baking, I'm going to whip up the sugar topping that you dip the donuts in. All right, so 1 cup of sugar goes in. Cinnamon and apple spice. So 1/4 a teaspoon of cinnamon, or excuse me, 3/4 of a teaspoon. And of course, I say the more cinnamon, the better. So that was about a heaping teaspoon. And then 3/4 of a teaspoon of allspice. So I'm going to do like I did before. 1/2 a teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/4 a teaspoon of nutmeg, and then 1/8 a teaspoon of the cardamom. All right, so that's, a basic sugar topping. And what the recipe calls for is 6 tablespoons of melted butter. And it calls for dunking your donuts in the melted butter and then rolling them in the sugar. And I know from when we did this in the fall, I knew that was going to be excessive before we even attempted it. So what we did is just melted a couple tablespoons of butter in a ramekin, used a pastry brush to brush the donuts, and then dipped in the sugar. It worked out beautifully that way, and that's what I recommend you do. So we're just waiting for the donuts to come out, and I'll show you the process of getting them sugared up, and we'll taste test them. So here's our overfilled first round of donuts. I know from making them the last time, it seemed like the ones that did not actually have holes were actually tastier than the ones with holes for some reason, so I'm not mad about it. And I spilled enough on that first round, the second round probably will have holes. Okay, so that's the first round baked. And even though they don't have a hole all the way through, they have a quasi hole on one side. And this is the second pan that's going in. So we did get 12. Just gonna give these a coat of butter. And I like to put them in the sugar right after instead of keeping going with the butter. Roll them around so you get the sides as well. Butter is so expensive these days. And even though it's a whole food, I'd say doing what the recipe recommends, which is dunking the entire donut in a bowl of butter, is just not the way to go for a lot of reasons. But that's just my opinion. You do it however you want. And just to show you here, I am coating the bottom with the sugar mixture. And even though it doesn't have any butter on it, the sugar still stays very nicely. So if you're trying to keep calories down or your saturated fat content down, you could do these without the butter. And I'm going to have probably close to a tablespoon of butter left, which will be perfect for doing the remaining 6 that are coming out of the oven in a minute. So that was 2 tablespoons of butter that I melted, rather than the 6 that the recipe calls for melting to do the finished donuts. But just to give you an idea what these look like when you break them open, look how fluffy and wonderful those are. Baked, not fried, is the way to go in my opinion. Thanks for watching.